Next up, our next speaker would like for you to go into the past a bit and explore what gives you that satisfying feeling of reminiscing the past. Please welcome Zifeng with the art of nostalgia.
Thank you, Terry. So, I would like to invite you, dear listeners, to please close your eyes and imagine a situation before everything begins. Imagine you have been in a foreign country for a period of time, for traveling, studying, or working. On that day, you were finally returning home. After hours of flight, as you enter the airport, you see a huge display board with a caption, "Welcome home," written in your mother tongue. As you look around, you are filled with that loving, dear language of yours that provides you an indescribable warmth, and you would whisper to yourself, "Ah, this place, again." In these moments, we experience when a long-gone episode of memory or a long-past sense of familiarity is retrieved from the countless files in our brain and played in front of our eyes, so vividly touchable yet also sorrowfully fading. As it stopped playing, we would sink into an emotion that is ambiguous, with loss, attachment, longing, and many nameless emotions. This is a feeling referred to by many poets and artists, and every one of us, as nostalgia. In Chinese, it means 怀旧 or 乡愁. It's a combination of both. So, good afternoon, dear listeners. This is Zifeng from Keystone Academy, grade 11, and today I'm going to talk about nostalgia, one of the most powerful sentiments that belong to us human beings. So according to Oxford Languages, nostalgia is a wistful longing or sentimental attachment to a period of time or a place in the past. It derives from two Greek words, nostos and algos, which respectively means the longing to return and pain. So nostalgia therefore means the pain that you feel for longing to return to a place or time in the past. When people discuss about nostalgia, they often talk about the psychological development of individuals. But for me, nostalgia is more than that, because it can be shared. It can be the collective bond that is established among a certain group of people belonging to a culture or an age. It is about me, about you, but it is also about us and about them. Yet, I must admit, it is extremely private. So, what exactly is it? Although it might seem rather conflicting, dear listeners, here's my claim. Nostalgia is a ultimate combination of narcissism and selflessness. Narcissism, the appreciation or even love for oneself to an obsessive extent. Why? In my opinion, narcissism relates with one particular type of nostalgia, which is personal nostalgia, meaning that it is a nostalgic feeling you get when reminded of something of your direct experience, and it is often on an individual scale. For example, when you remembered a previous best friend in your childhood, or a place that you often visited when you are young, and you feel sorrow for that loss, for the past, then that is personal nostalgia. It is related to narcissism because it is fundamentally based on the gaze of self-development. Gaze. Gaze means the emotional and introspective recognition of one's self-experience, and that often unintentionally include the acknowledgement of growth and improvement along the years. In other words, in personal nostalgia, you feel narcissist because you recognize the fruitfulness of the thousands of days that you dragged behind your past before you became yourself today. So that forms a narcissistic mentality because you have that underlying filter of self-appreciation and admiration, while in the form of approval or in the form of pity. And this mentality, at least in the moment, make you feel that compared to yourself, nothing else in the world is as interesting and important. So let's see an example. In his poetic memoir, Running in the Family, Canadian Ceylonese author Michael Ondaatje described his journey of revisiting his homeland, Sri Lanka, as well as recounting some of the family stories. While I'm reading his book, I feel the homesickness that is so strong, but also a sense of self-appreciation. Let's take a look. I was sleeping at a friend's house. I saw my father, chaotic, surrounded by dogs, and all of them were screaming and barking into the tropical landscape. Tense, not wanting to move as this heat gradually left me, as the sweat evaporated and I became conscious again of brittle air outside the window, searing and howling through the streets, and over the frozen cars hunched like sheep all the way down towards Lake Ontario. It was a new winter, and I was already dreaming of Asia. It was only in the midst of the party, among my closest friends, that I recognized I would be traveling back to the family I had grown from, those relationships from my parents' generation who stood in my memory like frozen opera. I wanted to touch them into words. So the nostalgia is so overwhelming in this passage, but along with the self-admiration. It is nostalgic when we see how Ondaatje awakened from his dream about his homeland, opening his eyes and realizing that the scene in front of his eyes is a cold winter, something entirely different. And when we read this passage, we will think about our own experience, thinking about your homeland, and then suddenly opening your eyes and realize everything in front of you is just strange and different. How we can resonate with this sad emptiness. But is there only sadness? No. In fact, it is a complex underlying emotion of nostalgia that cannot be categorized by positive or negative feeling that make nostalgia so sentimental and also narcissistic in a sense. Because when we see how Ondaatje would like to record down his family story, the enigmatic tropical landscape, the opera of family generations, we can understand his attitude. He appreciates it. He deeply treasures it. He was moved, attracted, and interested by his unique roots that shaped his self-identity today. He valued it and cherished it, and I would say he loved it. Of course, Ondaatje is not alone in this experience because there's so many authors in the world that describe their childhood as if they're writing creation myths, the birth of a beautiful human being. Typically, an example. Marcel Proust and his In Search of Lost Time, where a spoon of maddening pastry just run on and on into a childhood with a collection of memories that is more than 1 million words long. And when we consider how the authors are gazing their self-development, we can understand that narcissism derives from nostalgia because that is when you pay so much attention and emphasize your individuality as if you're the most worthy story to tell to everyone in the world. Interestingly, what accounts for the narcissism and personal nostalgia is for what changes. Because when you realize how you changed, when you see your growth, you will realize that although it is tough, your life journey is extremely rewarding. And as you turn into the character of who you are today, you realize that you have transformed, although you grieve for the loss of innocence. But in general, you appreciate your growth and you appreciate who you are. Think of an analogy. When you're thinking and feeling narcissism in the mentality of personal nostalgia, you are no longer drifting in the river of time. You become a river yourself. Now, apart from narcissism, I also talk about how nostalgia is related to selflessness. Selflessness. which means you share the intimacy and your concern for others. It's almost the extreme opposite of narcissism. So how is it possible? Selflessness relates to the type of nostalgia that we call cultural nostalgia, which is the shared bond of belonging and sorrow of a certain group based on a collective memory, such as of a culture, of an age, of a nation, an ethnic group, and things like that. So how is it possible for you to feel cultural nostalgia? It's simpler than you think. Have you ever had the experience of spending your time alone in a foreign country or another city, but it is a special festival of your culture? At that time, you will feel a sense of homesickness, but it's not only because you are reminded of your beautiful memory that you spent with your family in the past festivals. It is because that you feel the unique, familiar, and indescribable character of your culture in that moment has seemed to left you in solitude. So we can see that in cultural nostalgia, there is a shared bond and a collective sentiment because you are connected to a larger group, to a set of customs, values, memories that form a culture. So in that experience, you experience selflessness because you care more about something larger than yourself. For instance, you might even care about something that you never witnessed, such as fearing the loss of the prosperity of your nation, even though you don't know what actually happened. Just like this picture. When it is Spring Festival, you will feel the loss if you're not with your family, and when you see something collapse in your culture, even if it is so long in the past, you can still feel the sorrow that drift in the air. So one typical example of cultural nostalgia is huzn in the Turkish culture, and it is a word for pain, sorrow, and loss for a fallen empire. It is well described by Turkish novelist Orhan Pamuk in his essay collection, Istanbul, Memories of the City. Let us take a close look. If I am to convey the intensity of the huzn that Istanbul caused me to feel as a child, I must describe the history of the city following the destruction of the Ottoman Empire, and even more important, the way this history is reflected in the city's beautiful landscape and its people. We begin to understand huzn not as the melancholy of a solitary person, but the black mood shared by millions of people together. So a keyword here, shared, because cultural nostalgia only vibrates if solitary individuals are bounded by a larger mentality of culture, of sorrow, and of something that is related to a larger group. As we can see from Orhan Pamuk's description, huzn, in simpler terms, is a sorrow felt by people when they're reminded of the loss and the fall of their past Ottoman Empire. But let us think about it. How many people living today actually witnessed the fall of the empire? None. That is a short answer. But that does not stop them from sighing and aching, from feeling the sorrow that dominated the entire generation and the entire ethnic group that is only witnessed by the ancestors of their ancestors. So here we can see selflessness, because people are no longer caring about what they lose, but what they lose altogether. Of course, similar to personal nostalgia, cultural nostalgia is not always about sadness, because when people think about the sorrow, they are also showing approval and proof of their communal identity, and that is what forms culture, what forms selflessness. Just as what Pamuk describes with admiration, I am trying to describe now is not the melancholy of Istanbul, but the huzn in which we see ourselves reflected, the huzn we absorb with pride and share as a community. Huzn does not just paralyze the inhabitants of Istanbul, it also gives them poetic license to be paralyzed. And that is what, in my opinion, is cultural nostalgia, what forms collective bond, and what is ultimate selflessness. And of course, Turkey is not alone in this experience. One concept often compared to huzn is żal in Polish culture. So żal is the untranslatable word for sorrow in Poland. It It is so rich, but so obscure that it can be only understood of people in the polished ethnicity. For us, maybe we can only occasionally feel it in Chopin's music. And although Fusen and Zao are specific terms, cultural nostalgia does not always exist in specific terms, because it just exists everywhere. If you have ever met someone, an elder of the older generation, who gasped to you, back in our days with sparkles in your eyes, you never actually experienced that era, but you can feel their passion towards the past, then you know cultural nostalgia. If you have ever read from Chinese poets in the ancient times, or poets of your culture, who wrote about their sentimental belonging to a past generation of peace and prosperity that nation has lost today. And you don't actually know what happened, but you can resonate with their longing towards a past golden era, then you know cultural nostalgia. If you have ever read from Chinese poet Yu Guangzhong in his 1960s essay, the China that made him sick and dream for is not the geographical, but the historical China. The somberness of 50 centuries multiplied by 10 million square kilometers. If you understand his sorrow, dear listeners, then you must know cultural nostalgia. Interestingly, I talked about how personal nostalgia results with what changes, but cultural nostalgia relates with what never changed, because ages advance, but traditions do not. Because society reforms, but blood does not. Because when we are feeling cultural nostalgia, we often feel for something that is permanently lost, that is impossible to revive again. But in another case, it is selfless. It is established in the roots of a culture, of a group. So we must acknowledge it has certain eternity. Back to the analogy to a river. If personal nostalgia is when you become a river yourself, cultural nostalgia is when the countless rivers of ourselves flow towards the sea. And in that process, some land is never passed by certain rivers, but they all together encompass a land, and this land is what we call cultural nostalgia. So as what I explained, nostalgia is shared, but it is also private. It is sorrowful, but it is also proud. It is narcissist and selfless. It seems to be combining all these strange oxymorons, and that is what makes nostalgia so powerful, so touching, because it involves two intertwined identification. It is identifying yourself as an individual, but also identifying the culture that you belong to. So in the fleeting flow of time, nostalgia reminds you of who you are. But in the trend of globalization and transnational conformity, it reminds you of where you belong. If you know who you are and where you come from, you are a protagonist of your life. And nostalgia, dear listeners, it is the sentiment that belongs to the protagonist in the narrative of our world. So when you undertake nostalgia, when you feel the sorrow and pain for wanting to return to a place or time, it is a process of poetic catharsis, just as in Greek drama. So after nostalgia, the protagonists of life, which is every one of us, become heroes and heroines. So remember, when you experience a surging wave of nostalgia, you are your own